Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. But what does that really mean? Well, let's talk about it. One of the reasons why this particular verse can cause so much controversy or can be interpreted so many different ways is because that word life in English is often used with very broad nuance. If I say my life, I might be talking about my biological life. I might be talking about my health. I might also be talking about my interests or my relationships or just everything that's going on with me. And so when many people use that word life, they use it with that broad context in mind. And so then they think that, well, if Jesus said that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly, then we think of all of those broad things within our usage of that term, and we go, okay, well, then that just means that Jesus wants me to be healthy and have my relationships be blessed and all of these kinds of things. But the good news is that when we look at the scriptures, we don't just have to go with however we define words, but that we can find that the scriptures themselves bring a lot of clarity on what these words actually mean. Within the Gospel of John, we can do a word study, and if we look in English, we'll find that the word life appears 47 times in 39 different verses. Now, this particular search in English is going to include 2 different Greek nouns as well as verbal forms, and that's why we're going to come up with so many. If we only search for the word that is translated life in John 10:10, when Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly, then we're actually going to get a more narrow search. We're going to find that word appears in John's Gospel 36 times in 32 different verses. And of those 36 times, 17 times, that same word, that same Greek noun, is paired with what is translated in English as either eternal or everlasting. Now, what's important for us to understand as we look at this is that Jesus isn't just talking about our relationships and our interests. But we start to see, if we'll just read through John's Gospel from beginning to end, that there is a consistent picture that is being painted that tells us that what we think of as life is certainly valid, that is a way of thinking about it, but that's not really what Jesus is talking about. And so let's go back, because that verse when Jesus said, I have come that they might have life and have it more abundantly in John 10:10, let's go back a few chapters earlier and see what Jesus said in John chapter 5. In John chapter 5, verse 24, Jesus said, Truly, truly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and does not come into judgment, but is passed out of death into life. In this particular verse, we see that same noun that he used. I came that they might have life in John 10:10. We see it here twice, once paired with eternal and then once on its own. And what Jesus is saying is that those who hear the gospel, that Jesus came into the world to die for sinners, to make a way for we who have sinned against the holy and righteous God to be reconciled to the Father. Jesus came so that if we hear the gospel and believe, that we'll pass out of death into life, which means that what Jesus is describing, what most people think of as life, Jesus actually calls death. Jesus didn't come to give us more abundant death, simply to bless all the things that we usually think of when we think of our life, our interests, our health, our material possessions, our relationships. But he came that we might come out of that, which Jesus called death, into something else. So then in John 10:10, when he says, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly, he's speaking of some new quality of life that doesn't really relate to what we used to know before we heard the gospel. If we continue reading in John's Gospel, we see in John chapter 17 that Jesus himself actually defines what eternal life really is. And he says, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Jesus defined life not in the abundance of our material possessions, not in the abundance of our relationships with other people in this world, but primarily he defined life as our knowing God, knowing Christ. And when we look at the purpose of why John recorded these things in the first place, he tells us very explicitly what that purpose is in John chapter 20, when he wrote this, that these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. When we hear that Jesus came into the world that we might have life and have it more abundantly, we should rejoice. But we should also not mistake this to thinking that when Jesus says life, he means the same thing that we thought of as life before we heard the gospel. To run around chasing material possessions, trying to accumulate stuff or to accumulate experiences, the Bible describes that as chasing the wind. It's something that is vanity and will always disappoint in the end. Instead, Jesus came so that we could have something more substantive, that we could have a relationship with the true and living God, that we could know Jesus Christ, and then it becomes our great privilege, as long as we have biological life, to make him known in the world. In fact, that other noun that we find in John's gospel is not Zoe, like we find here in John 10:10 and these other verses that we just read, but is psuche. Jesus often says those who want to find this true abundant life, this Zoe life, this type of life that knows the true and living God and that knows Jesus Christ, in order to find that, we must lay down our psuche. Because if we try and cling to that which what we thought was life before we heard the gospel, but which is really death, then, well, no matter how full that might seem, it's not the true life that Jesus came to give us freely. If you are a Christian, I urge you to understand life in the terms that Jesus said, to understand that knowing him is the greatest value that we could ever find in this world. And then we should walk humbly and joyously in the privilege that we have as his ambassador in this world to make him known, since we know him ourselves. And if you're watching this and you're not a Christian, then I urge you to find life by believing in the gospel, to know that knowing Jesus Christ is much greater than winning the lottery or having a vast fortune that will only pass away in this world. Jesus did truly come into this world that we might have life and have it abundantly. Are you walking in the abundant life that Jesus came to purchase with his own blood so that we might know the true and living God and know Christ? Are you making him known in this world? I hope so, because that is truly life. Get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.